The northern Buddhists use the term Mayalba, which is earth, which is a place of hell, in the sense, not blazing fires of furnaces, but a place not so much of punishment, but of learning to put right the misdeeds of former lives or of this life. One only has to see the underlying cause behind evil, which is the association with oneself, one's country, one's totalitarian dictator, one's nation. It's always my, me. And now when a man says, I quote, "We have weapons of mass destruction and we will not fail to use them if needed," that is a very low vibration statement, because it fails to recognize that we, meaning we Russians, are of the same eternal substance as you Americans, as you Indians, as you Chinese. So it's cutting off one's consciousness from the totality of consciousness, which science has shown exists at a very deep level, and that's the wonderful contribution of quantum physics.
Welcome, everyone, to That Death Show. I'm Ann Kelly, and with me is not only my ridiculously talented co-host, esoteric author Tim Wyatt, but today we've been talking about it, and we're very excited to have the one and only Dr. B with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Edi Bilimoria is with us today. Welcome, Eddie, to That Death Show. How are you today?
And I'm recovering from Christmas, if I can put it that way.
For those of you who don't know who this is, we talk about him all the time here on That Death Show. Eddie's background is in engineering. He's also a dedicated and lifelong student of Theosophy, the perennial philosophy. I personally love working with these two. I talk about them a lot. And you know why? It's because I often describe that they are as near ego-free as anyone can be. They work tirelessly and selflessly to get these ancient teachings out into the world without pompousness or exclusivity, in loving service to all beings, allowing the spotlight to remain on the teachings, not their personalities. So Eddie is very pure of heart, very pure of heart. Eddie is a safety and an environmental engineer who has worked on projects like the London Underground and the Channel Tunnel. That's between England and France. For anybody who doesn't know, it's a very big deal. He brings a very strong scientific foundation to the exploration of consciousness. His recent award-winning, and we always talk about it here. Okay, here it is. I'm going to show you here. This is an award-winning, highly praised 4-volume set that came out in 2022. This is a magnum opus over 1,000 pages. It is called Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe and the Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans. It has inspired countless presentations, book studies, and shorts on this channel alone, as well as many podcasts, and now even films across the world. So last year, Eddie and Tim got together. They did. And they are working on a forthcoming book, which is it's a very exciting thing because it's called Consciousness Came First, Revealing Evidence for Mind Beyond the Brain. It's a condensed version of Unfolding Consciousness, and it is reducing the massive 670,000 words. You heard that correct, down to just 80,000. It's going to be published in paperback, ebook, and audiobook by Collective Inc. It's coming out in December. Now, both titles are a must-read for any and all of you who are interested in the deeper mysteries of life and consciousness and the perennial philosophy. And we always include links to both Tim and Eddie's books here. So we have a discount code if you want this 4-volume set. All right, this 4-volume set, we have a discount code. You can save £25 or $25 right now if you order through the Shepherd Walwyn website. All you have to do is type in capital letters, "I want my copy," with an exclamation mark, and you will save £25 today. You are welcome. Now, Eddie believes that spirituality is not confined to quiet retreats or simple study or through memberships to societies and organizations, but it is to be applied and lived, a part of everyday life. And Eddie Our Eddie is also a brilliant pianist. He's a choral singer and a passionate glider pilot. He does it all. And we all three often work together. I do my best to help them get their teachings out into the world. So I do PR and media for them using social media. And Tim, if I may, pass it over to you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit. Let's start with how you guys met and what's it like working together before we get into the main part of the show, Death is Transition.
Well, I first met Eddie round about 2008 when he was running one of his seminars at a place called Teckles Park, which used to be a facility owned by the Theosophical Society before they got rid of it. And I found his seminar absolutely fantastic. And the thing that I remember most distinctly about it is his advice. And he said, avoid negative people. And at that point, I did have one or two rather negative people in my life, but I took his advice, and they were no longer a part of my life for much longer after that. And I think I benefited hugely from that advice. So I shall always remain very grateful to Eddie for that.
Thank you, Tim.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And now they work together. We all kind of try to do our thing. Again, they allow the spotlight to remain on the teachings, not the individuals. So here are two, to me, humble, beautiful, gentle souls in service to humanity. And today, since death, that's the theme of our show, our favorite chapter, well, one of mine is I'm positive Tim loves it too. We talk about it all the time. It's from volume 2 of Unfolding Consciousness. And there's 3 volumes, really, and then the 4th one is the appendix. But the volume 2 is from Peering Down the Microscope, Man's Internal Landscapes. Now, chapter 5, again, is Death is Transition, Time at the Door of Eternity. And I love that chapter. I absolutely love it. There's so much about that chapter here on this channel. Eddie covers it all as best he can. Reincarnation as a 3-stage process. Death is not extinction. We don't end. We're eternal energy. He explains the esoteric science behind apparitions, the composition of man, heaven and hell redefined. There's so much there, but I wanted to start before we get too far into that. Eddie, there's a question from a viewer, and we could do a whole series on this, but the question is, Dr. Eddie mentions 3 elements: body, soul, and spirit. He asks, I wonder if Eddie could elaborate on this. What are these 3 distinct elements? What's the difference between the body, soul, and spirit? In your words, Eddie, please.
Before that, can I say, Anne, how grateful I am to you for that wonderful introduction. And also, it was a great privilege meeting Tim at Teckles Park. I still remember that memorable occasion. And subsequently, I've been absolutely full of admiration for the way Tim can encapsulate these deep, abstruse and esoteric truths in a language that is so accessible and so lucid. And that, of course, includes the way Tim describes death in his wonderful film. But to come back to the question, how does one distinguish? One is talking of a continuum. The best way is the advice given by all the sages by analogy with nature. Now, if you think of water is H2O, 1 atom of oxygen and 2 of hydrogen. Now, that can express as ice, water, and steam. So, in this analogy, there is an interface between steam and ice, which is water. So soul is the interface between spirit and body. And very often soul is mistaken for spirit, but it's not. At the lower end, soul touches body, so to speak. At the upper end, soul touches spirit. So in terms of another metaphor, think of soul as the middle management in any organization. The middle management is the most difficult because the middle management has to interface with the workers on the shop floor and with the chief executive. So the vision of the chief executive is transmitted via the middle management to the workers. So the soul acts as this transmissive agent that brings down the potentiality of spirit such that it can be used by the physical body.
Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to me, everything in the universe is ensouled in some way. The soul is the vehicle that we use to negotiate the journey in and out of physical states. The soul is always there. And I think one of the mistakes that humanity makes at the moment is not understanding its true soul nature. We're so focused on the body and its needs and desires and all the rest of it, we tend to forget that we have this much more important, everlasting, eternal recycling vehicle called the soul.
Thank you, Tim. And Edi, I know you get this question a lot on your podcasts and in your interviews, and we've talked about it before, but how would you describe the definition of consciousness or mind? It's just so huge. How do we describe it from your words, please?
I would say, first of all, Anne, you can't define it, because this is a serious point, because any definition presupposes a logical process, and logic implies intellect. And the intellect is always tied down to the object, so it is always partial and one-sided. So if we turn it around, consciousness cannot be defined. It is an experience that can be put into many words. If I ask you or anyone to define love, you can't. If I journey to Bingley, where Tim lives, beautiful place, or to Totnes, so close to where Anne lives, I couldn't define my journey. I could describe it. So it is an experience. And the great problem in science is working through the intellect, we get stuck with definitions. You can define something that is an object. Now, the intellect can neither prove nor disprove God, the divine, or anything, because these things are infinite. They are beyond the finite parameters which intellect deals with. We describe consciousness, we express it, but we can't define it, other than to talk about sentience, love, experience, awareness, emotion. All of these terms are like fractals, so to speak, that add up to the totality of the experience.
Well, I think one of the very valuable things that Edi has done in his work, and follows on from the work of many other people, is to get rid of this idea that consciousness is somehow just stuck in our heads, and that it is an epiphenomenon or a byproduct of the electrochemical activity going on in the brain. This is why science has such a difficulty with it, because it can't see beyond the materialistic paradigm. It cannot accept that consciousness can exist without some physical vehicle to conduct that consciousness. And this is where Edi's work is so vitally important in extending mind beyond the brain. I mean, human intellect is a fantastic achievement, but as Edi mentioned earlier on, we do run the danger sometimes of being imprisoned by that very faculty.
Edi, is the brain a receiver, a sender, or both?
Sender of what and a receiver of what, Anne?
Thought.
It is. It is, but it's not a generator. It acts as a conduit. And just coming back very quickly to definitions, you have white light shone through a prism, and you got the colors. The prism in this analogy is the brain. The prism does not generate the colors. It refracts the colors. Now, if one color is red, or another color is violet, you can't define red. You can say what the frequency is, but just saying a frequency as a number in no way would convey the experience of seeing red. So in this way, a number is very limited. The quantitative approach is very limited in its ability to talk about the experiential and the qualitative.
One of the difficulties is that if we start looking on the idea that the brain generates thoughts rather than being a processor, that excludes the idea that people receive thoughts from beyond themselves. You've only got to look at the great creative people of history, be it Pythagoras, Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, anybody who is creative mathematically, scientifically, musically. And they are quite clear that they don't generate these musical notes or these ideas. They are the receiver of them from a much wider repository beyond themselves. And this is the area that fascinates me, and I know that it fascinates Eddie too.
There is a transmission process through the brain, and the brain in that sense is like a reducing valve, that the more relaxed the mind state, the wider is the valve and the more it lets through. So a high brain state actually narrows the flow of creativity through the valve, so to speak, using that analogy.
So can I expand on that or understand? The more relaxed the brain is, the more we're letting go of our own, what we believe are our own thoughts.
Exactly.
The more we're receptive to that universal consciousness coming through.
Yes,
correct?
Yes, exactly.
You explained something not long ago about what thoughts are. People want to know what thoughts are. We think this internal dialogue is ourselves and belongs solely to us, and they flit away. Would you mind, Eddie, explaining your beautiful definition of what thoughts actually are, please?
I think I said a long time ago that we call thoughts into being. So depending on our internal state, we summon up the appropriate thought, so to speak, which is more to do with the elemental life, which I am sure Tim could talk a great deal about. So if our internal state is one of jealousy or hatred, then we will call into being the thought that is appropriate to our internal state. If our internal state is one of love and compassion, then the thought we will call into being will be commensurate with that state. So we call these energies, think of thought as an energy, and we give that energy shape and form by our internal state. And that is to do a lot with the elemental life, which is a huge subject. And I know Tim's very erudite on the whole subject of elementals.
Well, it's often said in a number of esoteric traditions that thoughts are things, not the way that the table that I'm sitting at or the car parked on my drive is a thing in that sense. It is much more rarefied matter. I think what we have to understand is that we have more than one mind. We have a lower mind attached to our lower selves, which is often described as the desire mind, because it's often fueled by our emotions and what we want to achieve and what we want to do, and our our desires of one sort or another. We also have a higher mind, which is attached to the higher self. And this is a mind which is able to conceptualize and to appreciate such things as noble truths and beauty and that sort of thing. But even beyond that, even beyond the intellectual faculty that we all have, is a higher principle. And this is what I suspect artists and creative people tap into. And this is the wisdom intuition principle, which allows us ultimately access to a vast world of ideas way beyond ourselves, but which we can tap into and which we can access, and which are not ultimately filtered through the intellectual mind, but through a much higher process than that. And this is something that human beings are now starting to develop in, I think, a very major way.
It is so important to get that out there into the world. I'm so grateful to have you two here with us today on That Death Show, which is really a project that all of us are here because talking about death, it seems like, why are we so obsessed with death? Why are we so passionate about understanding death? All of us. Many would ask how understanding death and talking about death all the time could lead to a better life or a more fulfilling life. Eddie, would you explain why this chapter in the second book, Death is Transition, Time at the Door of Eternity. Tim's film, The Myth of Death. Why is it important that we understand death? How does that help us in life?
It helps us understand life in the sense that if you understand how I live my life today, I can far better plan and look forward to how I will live my life tomorrow. And it's an old saying in the esoteric tradition that to understand the process of death, to understand the process of waking life and sleeping life, so to speak. The other point is that people are so obsessed with this idea of death because deep down within every person, there is that eternal spark of divinity, for want of better terms, which is uncomfortable with the dictates of materialistic science that death is extinction. So whatever science tells us, human beings are not happy with it because that inner core within us realizes that we have a mortal body, but there is an immortal aspect, and death is only the sloughing off of the mortal coil.
Problem arises here because our definition of life is so narrow. We only accept that life can exist within a physical form. Many people, although they believe in the survival of the soul in some form, and some even believe in reincarnation, they find it very hard to accept the idea that once the physical body dies, something of equal importance remains. And this is why we go to war against death, which is a ludicrous thing to do, just the way that we've gone to war against nature. You know, we think in our human hubris that we can somehow defy death. And this is why people spend stupid amounts of money getting themselves frozen after death in the hope that they can be revived from their cryogenic sloth at some point in the future.
Thank you, Tim. And the definition of consciousness, we've quoted you several times on this, Edi. You say consciousness expresses itself as matter, as matter,
not in matter.
In matter. Mm-hmm. Would you mind elaborating on that for us, please?
Yes, that as matter, I mean, it is an appearance and expression of consciousness. In the same way, if we look at a rainbow, it is not an object, it is a phenomena. And we come back to this problem with definitions. We confuse the objective with the phenomenal. So a rainbow is not an object. You can't put it in a box like you can put, a glass of water in a box, so to speak. Water droplets present as a rainbow, but they're not a rainbow. And I'm not splitting hairs there, because it depends. It's really a question of the laws of refraction, of optics, and also the neurochemical processes in the human being, and also the non-physical bodies that convert that neurochemical experience, data, so to speak, into a living experience. So as matter means an appearance, not a product.
And everything then is conscious.
Yeah.
Tim, your thoughts on that, please.
The way I see it is that there is nothing but consciousness in the entire universe that we can observe and that which we can't observe, and that matter, the hard physical stuff in the world in front of us, which is not hard and physical at all, it's mainly empty space. But this is consciousness stepped down to its lowest level, if you like. And this idea that Edi proposes, that consciousness came first, that consciousness is the essential building block of all existence within the universe, is a very powerful, very persuasive thought. And I wish more people would consider this, because it explains so much about ourselves and the mysteries of life and the world.
Imagine if we walked around like that, and understanding that everything that there is consciousness, just like we are, the unity of everything. It would change the way we behave. it would actually change the world. And that's why I think it's very important that we get this information out there. In Death is Transition, Time at the Door of Eternity, you do explain, and we did a little bit on this a while back, about the eighth sphere and what we call a Vici. I wanted to ask you about, is there a hell in esoteric science, perennial philosophy, and can you describe what evil is for us, please?
Well, there isn't a hell in the Christian or Orthodox sense of a place of eternal damnation. The best way to look at hell is a state of very coarse and a low vibration of consciousness. So the more a person is cut away or cut off from his higher self, the more the consciousness is dragged down into its coarsest levels, so to speak. But in terms of evil, there isn't an independent principle of evil. And people will find this hard to believe or to accept. But if there were an independent principle of evil, in other words, a duality, how can a duality come without an underlying unity? So there is a famous chapter in Madame Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, Demon est Deus inversus. So evil is the rotten side, the inverse side of God, so to speak. So think in terms of another analogy of a beautiful fruit on a tree. If you leave it long enough, it turns unripe and pretty foul. It didn't start off that way. So look at evil in terms of that sort of process of getting overripe when everything starts off pure and beautiful.
Well, people always associate hell with something that happens after you die, but we are very good as human beings at creating hells on earth. And I absolutely agree with Eddie that hell and evil and all these associated negativities are just the lowest vibrational states. And these low vibrational states happen because we are largely disconnected from true knowledge of ourselves and from the energies of the universe. We look on ourselves as these siloed individuals operating in isolation. And as soon as we get rid of those barriers and start to look on things in a more collective and connected way, we immediately raise our consciousness, and our ability to create and participate in these hells is reduced by doing that, I suggest.
That's perfectly expressed, Tim. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, the northern Buddhists use the term Mayalba, which is earth, which is a place of hell, in the sense, not blazing fires of furnaces, but a place not so much of punishment, but of learning to put right the misdeeds of former lives or of this life. And one only has to see the underlying cause behind evil, which is the association with oneself, one's country, one's totalitarian dictator, one's nation. It's always my, mine, me. Now, when a man says, I quote, "We have weapons of mass destruction and we will not fail to use them if needed," that is a very low vibration statement, because it fails to recognize that we, meaning we Russians, are of the same eternal substance as you Americans, as you Indians, as you Chinese. So it's cutting off one's consciousness from the totality of consciousness, which science has shown exists at a very deep level. And that's the wonderful contribution of quantum physics. So science has so much to teach us, if only the scientists would take note of what the scientists are saying, let alone the politicians who are utterly crude in their thinking in the main, because the consciousness totally sectarian and therefore troublesome.
I often, when I watch the news and I see what's happening, or if I do see something, I think about what the karmic debt would be for that much cruelty, selfishness, just awful. I'm thinking that is such a huge thing, what we're doing to one another. You will find out when you cross to the other side. You talk about in Unfolding Consciousness, the role of parent and child, the higher and the lower self. And you've also explained that sometimes when people are so dark and choose the ultimate selfish path of cruelty and greed and all that, and they just can't, the higher self can't seem to get the personality under control, there is a recycling that takes place. It isn't a damnation. All is not lost, but it's a recycling. Would you mind explaining a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a recycling in the sense that when the personality is through consistent evil, it gets cut off from the umbilical connection with the higher self as parent. And when the higher self as parent can no longer discipline its child, the personality, there is a severance of that connection. And then there is the path of absolute decline into the state of avicii and then the eighth sphere. But the higher self then has to start that journey right all through the kingdoms of nature. So the analogy given in the Eastern literature is a laborer who is happy to let his, a farmer, who is happy to let his laborers till the field. And if they bring even one sheaf of corn back, he is happy to let them get on with the job. But when there is nothing left, then the field is abandoned and the farmer has to seek a new field.
So it's absorbed until the next Manvantara? Is that what I'm understanding?
So.
To go through a mineral?
To the next cycle of existence, yes. The next cycle, yeah.
So that's the eighth sphere, which would be equivalent to...
The eighth sphere, the eighth planet, is nature's recycling facility, so to speak.
That's really well said.
And we have recycling on Earth, and nature has their own recycling. Filthy beyond redemption is recycled and then just got rid of.
To try again and another evolution of breath of life.
We are told that this is, relatively speaking, quite rare, and you have to go to extreme measures through many lives and be disconnected over a long period of time. It's not like someone from the church saying, "Oh, well, you committed this sin, so you're going to go to hell," or anything like that. That's just a Christian interpretation of these things. And in fact, one of the things that people do confuse, we were talking about hell earlier on. And obviously in the secret doctrine, in the esoteric tradition, we do talk about this place that we go to after we die, the astral plane, which is a kind of refinery in itself. It's there to process some of the more extreme emotions that we've had and to store up the best of ourselves and get rid of the worst. So it's like an oil refinery, taking crude oil and then turn it into all sorts of different products. But I think sometimes this has become conflated in some people's minds, particularly in the minds of some Christian people, with a kind of hell itself. Christianity talks about a purgatory. Well, purgatory, as far as I understand, is simply a purification process, a period of assessment and reconstruction.
Absolutely. Purgatory is taking a shower after a hard day's work and then cleansing one's body and mind for another hard day's work.
Mm-hmm. It's a cycle that does not end.
Yeah.
We have one last question before we wrap it up here, because we want them to want more, Edi. In chapter 5 in volume 2, you do explain, and Tim and I have done a couple shows on this before. Tim's explained, what is it that we are seeing when we see a misted apparition or a shadow person? I know we don't have a lot of time, but what is it when we see a ghost, Edi Bilimoria?
When we see a ghost, it depends also on our internal state and our sensitivity. We can be in a highly tuned state and be receptive to these higher ethereal beings. But I would say very simply that ghosts emanate or appear for various reasons. The most easily seen ghost, if I can put it that way, is just after a person has died, where even a slightly sensitive person will see an ethereal mist above the body or around the body, and these spectral images can and have been photographed. The other ghost, so to speak, the apparition, is what's known as the Kamarupa, the discarded psychic body, which can be attracted to Earth for various reasons if its energies are still unspent and it is drawn to the terrestrial sphere. And those ghosts appear in places that are familiar to it, such as the family home. And it is no surprise that during World War II, many of such apparitions of soldiers killed on the battlefield appeared in the family bedroom. And it doesn't take much to see that in that circumstance, the dying thoughts of a soldier on the battlefield would be his parents, his mother, and all the time his mother and parents would send loving thoughts to their son on the battlefield. So that acts as a very powerful attraction for a discarded individual that has not had time to process his life because he's been cut off in full flow. And when you're cut off in full flow, you have not been given the benefit of that processing that Tim has mentioned, the purgatory, the refining process. And so one is earthbound and drawn back to the terrestrial sphere.
People may have all sorts of connections to the physical plane, business undone, things which they feel still need to be dealt with, responsibilities for other people. So this would explain a lot why some individuals are reluctant to move on. But it's very, very common for people to witness dead relatives in the hours and days after their death, either in physical form or ethereal form, or very often in dreams. I know a number of individuals over the past year who've lost close relatives, and lost relatives have come to them very quickly after their physical deaths in dreams, mainly to assure them that they're okay, that they are still in existence. And I think this is a very, very healthy thing, and it's not something people should be frightened of at all. It's quite the opposite. I think it is a matter of great reassurance. And in fact, this is why the spiritualist movement grew up in America after 660,000 soldiers died in 4 years. Yeah. And so many women especially wanted to know what had happened to their sons and husbands and uncles and other members of the family, because it was obviously principally men who died in that. And that movement was very, very important in providing that reassurance, even though many of the things it believes in were slightly wacky and distorted. It nevertheless provided a great deal of comfort for people, and still does.
It does. There are so many paranormal channels, so many shows and podcasts, but they stop at the, I've seen this, it was so scary. Very rarely do they investigate further and find out it is all leading right back to consciousness and who you are and what you are. There's so much there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Any final thoughts before we close this episode?
Death also is the ending of the past in time. This is something that Krishnamurti used to talk about very eloquently when I heard him so often in Brockwood Park, that time and death are coupled. So, as Krishnamurti put it, death is the ending of the past caught in time. So, the more one can live in the present moment, one is constantly being reborn from moment to moment.
Well, all I would say about death is that it provides the ultimate career opportunity, doesn't it? We've finished this job. We have a little bit of time off on the inner planes, depending on who we are and what our requirements are. And then we have to come back and do it all again. But all of us, whether we like it or not, are creating our next lives right now, just the way that our lives now have been shaped by those lives we've led before. So the more we can do to lead good lives and not do bad stuff, then the better the career opportunity next time round, hopefully.
The richer your life on Earth, the richer will be your post-mortem experience.
And you're not talking monetary riches. You're talking about the richer you live, the internal
absolutely.
work.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Billionaire, you will not get your yacht and jet plane.
Thank you, gentlemen. Remember, Unfolding Consciousness. Now listen, there's a 4-volume hardback set out right now. It is available all over, all right? And there are ebooks online on Amazon. But if you want the hardback copy of Edi Bilimoria's Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe and the Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans, if you order through the Shepherd Walwyn website, they have a US and a UK distributor. Just type in, "I want my copy," in capitals with an exclamation mark. I'll put it down below. You get £25 or $25 off your purchase. So remember, Consciousness came first, which is a collaboration between Edi and Tim. You're looking right at them. This is going to be published in December of this year, Revealing Evidence for Universal Intelligence and Mind Beyond the Brain. That will be out again in December. Don't forget to check out Tim's Substack. I love that Edi loves Tim's Substack. I'd like to get Edi a Substack too. I'm trying to get him there. I think that would be fantastic. Right now, check out Tim's Substack. It is called The Esoteric Perspective. It goes hand in hand with everything you see on this show, and it's free to join. And don't forget about the reason that we're sitting here, which is we got together when Tim did this show. We thought there's not enough stuff about this. There's the scary paranormal stuff, but no one's ever talking about what happens after death. All right. What's the esoteric science say? The show, the documentary, is sweeping film festivals, actually, and it is free to watch on the At That Death Show YouTube channel. It is called The Myth of Death. So congratulations on all those film festival recognitions. There's still more coming in. Watch it for free. And remember to get your copy of everyone's Book of the Dead on firewheelbooks.co.uk. You can't get a better testimony than that. Remember, death is transition. It's not fatal. It's not final. It's not permanent. Join us and our special guests every Wednesday as we explore esoteric science's explanation of what takes place after physical death. We are eternal energy like rays of the sun. We are all sparks of the divine. And remember, we're a tiny little team. That Death Show is just Tim and I. So if you can, please help us get these teachings out there to give comfort and hope to all. Please like, subscribe, share, rate, review, whatever you can do. We appreciate it. And we love you, and we love you to death and beyond. So since you're eternal, we love you eternally. So thank you so much, Edi. We love you. Thank you for being here with us.
And thank you, Tim. Your antipathy to ugliness. The reason why the Catholic Church have anathematized reincarnation, your last post, it's really superb, and I thoroughly recommend everyone reading that.
That's the Esoteric Perspective on Substack. Yeah. And Edi, I'm still going to stay on top of you to get your own out there. He will be having a bot out soon. I'm not going to say too much, but it will be a conscious bot. And that'll be coming from Edi Bilimoria with the folks from Buddha at the Gas Pump. And we love them all over there too. So these two bringing these teachings out into the world in service to humanity, letting the spotlight remain on the esoteric principles, not themselves. I love them dearly. Ladies and gentlemen, Edi Bilimoria, Dr. B as Tim calls him. We'd love to have you back as often as you wish, Edi. You're always welcome here. We love you. And we will see you next week. Next week, Tim and I will be back to talk about the death of civilizations and empires. So have a fantastic week. Love you.
We've seen plenty of that now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Death comes to us all, but death is not a tragedy. Everyone's Book of the Dead by Tim Wyatt reveals a whole new perspective on what lies beyond this earthly life. The Egyptians have a Book of the Dead. The Tibetans have a Book of the Dead. Shouldn't you have one too? This captivating, richly illustrated book explores the mystery of death by examining it from every angle, sharing the ageless esoteric teachings on karma, reincarnation, and after-death states. as well as examining death and dying in different cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions. Death is not fatal, final, or permanent, but simply a transitional doorway to a new beginning. Get your copy of Everyone's Book of the Dead today at firewheelbooks.co.uk.